yes, there are issues on the right. Yes, Republicans are not the answer to saving America. It's only Jesus. But the nature between the way the two ends of the political spectrum express themselves is so vastly different. You're doing a massive disservice to say it's equal sin on both sides.
Hi again, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Narrative Podcast. Mike Andrews, Aaron Baer, David Mahan joining you today. Guys, do you like memes?
I love memes. Love memes. That's like half my life is just...
I know. I communicate in memes.
That's right.
I can't help but think as we get set to work through the news today of the guy in the hot dog costume who's run the Wienermobile into a building, and it says, "We're still looking for the man who did this."
Oh, it's one of my favorites. All-time favorite there. Yeah.
It's a great one.
It's
what you guys
exactly. Because David is an old man who's still,
David friended me on Facebook this week.
That was not David. You're getting scammed. David doesn't know how to use Facebook.
I was like, I finally made it. I got a friend request from David Mahan on Facebook.
If you ever get anything on social media from David, you're it's probably not him because he barely knows how to work his cell phone. That's the
Gmail.
Exactly.
Well, the reason I led with that is because the big news this week is about the Southern Poverty Law Center. Apparently has a new group to add to their hate list. And believe it or not, it's the Southern Poverty Law Center, apparently.
Right? Exactly. That's right. Exactly right.
Yeah, this was big news that the Department of Justice has come out with an indictment against the SPLC. What we know is that they're accused of wire fraud, bank fraud, money laundering. Essentially, the big picture story here is about $3 million or more that they've given to leaders of extremist groups that essentially are fueling the racism that they're fighting.
America was not racist enough for the Southern Poverty Law Center. That is the bottom line of this, is that if we're not racist enough, you just got to create the racism to then go fight the racism. It's a complex scheme they've developed here.
Yeah, it's also like the kid with the butterfly. Is this racism?
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
Like I will say when something like this comes out, it is the best time to be on X, because the creativity of the masses is just inspired in so many ways. But it does, and I'm sure we'll get into this, but I think for a lot of us, I had one attorney in town said, "Listen, we've known the left funds a lot of sort of AstroTurf or antagonistic organizations, but the idea that the SPLC would send money to the KKK is just." I wouldn't think that would be something that would happen.
The one organization they really cut their teeth fighting against.
Right,
exactly. Jim Crow South days.
Yeah.
And then they're sending money their way. Astounding stuff. And the SPLC is claiming that, these weren't contributions. This was to source informants and that kind of stuff. That's sort of the line that they're holding. But before we get into the implications, we really need to talk about just the indictment itself. And, as you guys heard the stories or read more about this, Aaron, what are some things that jump out to you in the indictment?
Yeah, I think, one, this is a grand jury indictment, right? So that does mean this has gone through some vetting, some consideration, all of this kind of stuff. So it is significant, right? I think there is going to be efforts by the left, by some in the media, to try to just dismiss this as a conservative witch hunt or a liberal witch hunt by the Trump administration. This is not so easily dismissed, I will say. Now, I don't think this is a slam dunk. Like, I don't think for sure you're going to see, just based off what we see in this indictment. It's a 14-page indictment. You can go read it yourself. The federal government has some work cut out to do here. No matter what's here is damning on the SPLC. And I think the important part here is now we're going to get into discovery, and we're going to see even more details come out. And the FBI is this is just against the SPLC itself. It's not anything against any of the individuals who perpetrated this wire fraud in particular. But it is the foundation. So there will be more to come, I think, on that front. But it is a very clear foundation. I think, reading through this indictment, I really see two major claims. One that I think is going to be harder for the federal government to prove, but doesn't necessarily mean they won't be able to, and one that I think is feels much more black and white to me. So the harder one that they're going to be that they're going to have to prove is that they defrauded their donors, right? And their case for that is they didn't tell their donors they were taking the money they raised and giving it to these folks in these extremist groups.
Because they had shell organizations.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And the shell organizations is where I think the wire fraud, that's the second piece. I think that's the piece that's going to be really, the government's going to have a really good case there. What the SPLC is going to say back about the defrauding their donors is, and they'll probably, I'm sure they'll even bring donors forward saying, yeah, we didn't know that they were doing this, but we're glad they did. And we think what they were doing was fighting extremism, and they were paying these informants. Now, the problem with that, though, and this is where I think the headline of this is the $270,000 they paid to the individual who organized the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, is these individuals, the events that they, and especially the Unite the Right rally one, that there's data that shows the SPLC raised over $127 million following the Charlottesville event, rally, whatever you want to call it. They raised that much money on it, and it looks like they were actually a part of the planning of it. Like it looks like the federal government's making the case. This event probably doesn't happen, or at least doesn't happen as large as it was, without the SPLC spurring it on. I mean, that was, I will say, when I saw the pictures from Charlottesville, and even since then, we've never seen a hate rally, like a white supremacy rally, that well organized and that well executed ever. I mean, like, at least in our lifetime, right? Again, David's like, what, 80s? Well, maybe in David's lifetime, no, but
35.
Sorry, maybe in David's lifetime, but like in our lifetime, we've never seen a rally that well organized, and I think that's going to be a really interesting one to watch. And I also, this part I don't know the legal argument on, but I also think it's one thing for the FBI to have informants. I don't know if, like, just you and I can just go pay informants.
501c3 for
right? Yeah, exactly. Like it's so that part of it I think is really interesting. So
are you saying we have to kick Andrew Michaels off the payroll here?
Exactly. Right.
It's an amazing business model, though. You invest $270,000, and you get what? What'd you say? 11 million?
127 million, right? So
That's
you put
a
in
great
270
ROI.
and you make 127 million and fabricating the problem.
If that's legal, I mean,
right? You're in the wrong business, Dave. Yeah. So I do think that part is the defrauding their donors is going to be a hard case, because I think you're going to see a lot of the SPLC's donors being like, no, we're perfectly fine with this. We weren't defrauded. But again, that's not to say we're not going to make the case here. But the wire fraud piece, where they established organizations and they signed documents with banks, they established LLCs and businesses. They signed documents with banks and other institutions saying the purpose of these companies, and I mean, in the indictment, let me see if I can find some of the names of these things. It's something like just generic, like Fox Photography, Northwest Technologies, Tech Writers Group, Rare Books Warehouse. Mm-hmm. My favorite was Center Investigative Agency, which is CIA. Like, come on. They signed documents saying the purpose of these bank accounts is to help Rare Books Warehouse or Northwest Technologies, and actually the purpose of these organizations was for the SPLC to funnel through to pay informants, quote unquote, or activists and white supremacists in these organizations. And so that piece feels black and white to me. But again, there's this is just the very beginning of a lot more briefing to come. That's going to be really interesting to see.
Yeah. And as far as our interactions with the SPLC go, they've labeled CCV a hate group, and we've had to deal with the fallout from that. And I think their claim to fame, as we've talked with Tyler O'Neill before on this podcast, they are exaggerating threats. They're calling basic Christians' belief hate. And that's bad enough on its own. But now this allegation that they're actually constructing events to conflagrate these very, very serious cultural issues and make them more violent.
Right.
It's hard to get your mind around, honestly.
Yeah, and I think, the thing that shocked me about this, obviously, for those of you that don't know, CCV is on their hate map for the state of Ohio. I think there's 11 organizations, several of which I'm very good friends with folks who run these organizations. They're just beautiful people. But if you feel
you are now, if you're listening to this podcast, you are now officially under that designation too. Just
congratulations.
Welcome to the club.
Exactly.
Well, we're kidding here, but not kidding. I mean, this is a group who for decades has been sending data to the FBI. Mm-hmm. Right. So there's 501c3 who obviously has multi-millions of dollars to just, give to what they call informants or whatever. And then they've been funneling that data on their, quote, hate groups like CCV to the FBI. I mean, this is a big deal. This is not a law enforcement agency. Mm-hmm. And apparently that relationship was severed here recently with this the recent revelations.
It was severed when Trump came in, right? I mean, that was one of the upshots of the administration is, they were working very closely with Biden and putting groups like us on their radar.
Yeah. And interesting thing that I read was that the Biden DOJ had actually started this investigation and then closed it.
Right.
Without coming to any resolution, just like, oh, we're not going to pursue that anymore.
Right.
Well, like what are the consequences for being on this hate map, right? I know, we joke about it here, but from what I understand, you could lose the ability to be on major donor sites,
deplatforming,
funding,
debanking. Mm-hmm. We've seen all kinds of things from
like
allied organizations.
Financial death penalty.
Yeah. No, I mean, this is stuff we've dealt with here. It's one of the reasons why we encourage donors to work with what are called DAFs, donor advised funds, things like National Christian Foundation, because a lot of donors will use a donor advised fund for their giving, helps protect their anonymity, helps them maximize their tax benefits, all of these types of things. Well, there are secular DAFs like, for example, the Columbus Foundation or other foundations like that. And if we've had issues where donors have tried to donate to CCV and have had issues because the DAF will say, well, did you know they're a hate group and we don't want to give money to a hate group. We don't think you should give money. So, I mean, there's real consequences on top of the security threats, right? I mean, just months before Charlie Kirk was assassinated, him and Turning Point USA were put on the hate map from the Southern Poverty Law Center. And of course, there's the shooter that went into the Family Research Council. With a backpack full of Chick-fil-A sandwiches. This was in 2012, with the intent of killing as many FRC employees as he could because they were a hate group, right? His words, not ours. And thankfully, the security guard there stopped them from coming in. But this is something, while we joke about it here, this is something we take very, very seriously at CCV, and we have to, because their words have consequences,
and it costs a lot of money to beef up security. And,
oh my gosh,
you can't walk into FRC without 10 minutes of them going through your stuff. But this is crazy. If we're looking at this kind of money, $270,000, $1 million, I mean, this is money that is life changing for, I'm sure, a lot of these people that are in these hate groups. They're saying that they're dismantling these groups. Now, we know that they've been paying these folks for 8 years, 7 years, 10 years. Have any of these groups been dismantled? We're just paying them.
Yeah. Well, the thing for the SPLC is if they dismantle these groups, who needs the SPLC anymore? Right. So it doesn't quite seem like it's in their interest for these groups to be dismantled, right?
And is there an application to be an informant? Like, where would Mark go?
No, but Dave, I do
Asking for a friend, David.
I do want to just go back to you just said something on the very real cost of security. This is not something we've talked about on the podcast before, but many of you guys will remember we had the Ohio March for Life, where we get 4,000 to 5,000 people out every year. Just a few. We recorded the podcast live just 2 weeks after 3 weeks after Charlie's assassination. It was one of the first open air events in the country following Charlie's assassination.
I remember.
And again, folks, we didn't talk about this publicly for obvious reasons, but about a week before the event, I remember sitting in my office and seeing Homeland Security, state troopers, Columbus PD, and all these law enforcement walking in. And with the March for Life, not only do we have the big stage, like wide open to the public in downtown Columbus with all of these flat surfaces and roofs all around, but then we also have a mile parade route through downtown. Parking garages. And so we had to pay to have additional security. We had to have folks on the roofs all over the parade route for our safety, right? And this is because when you say that, like, there are you compare Christians to the KKK, right? And you think about how awful of an organization the Ku Klux Klan is, right? That they lynched people and they bullied people and like literally physically violently harassed people to leave town. And the awful crimes they committed against children and women, and you say, hey, there are people just like that. Right. In your community, and it's just you talk to the SPLC, racism is just as bad, if not worse, today than it was before, and bigotry is just as alive. And it's, hey, here's CCV and Family Research Council and ADF and Focus on the Family as your example. Look how big these organizations are, and they're everywhere. And so bigotry is just as alive. Like, those words matter, and they infect certain people's brains. And that inspires them to great violence.
And they target you. They literally, I'm talking about like on their hate map, we are on the hate map for LGBT community, for our hate towards the, so they are targeting an entire community against us like that. It's not very general. It's very targeted.
And it's not only that they're saying it, but they're being amplified by the mainstream media. Like, for whatever reason, they have been in partnership with the media, have been seen as the definitive expert on what hate is. And so we're going to promote this. We see it every time we're mentioned in an article. There's always that asterisk of labeled as a hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Center. Like, it 60% of the time we're mentioned?
Gosh, all the time. And
100%.
Yeah, well, honestly, and it's so funny. I've had these conversations with journalists before where I've said, this is just a leftist advocacy group, right? That's just come up with a really clever marketing strategy. And literally the one answer a reporter gave me, I'll say his name is Daryl Rowland. He's no longer a reporter at the Dispatch. They used to be in this building. I don't know if you knew that.
Yeah. I'd heard since retired to basements all across Ohio.
Yeah, but Daryl literally said to me, well, nobody else is tracking this, and they've been doing it for a long time, so that's why we use them. And that was it. Literally was laziness was his answer.
No one has a problem labeling something we say as opinion,
right?
But when somebody who agrees with them says it, it's a fact that needs to be documented and repeated,
and has to be, because they are some authority on it. And again, like the bottom line is, like, the fundamental premise of a group like the Southern Poverty Law Center is that Martin Luther King was a failure, right? Is that the civil rights movement was a failure, that America is more racist today than it was before. And that's demonstrably not true. Are there problems on the right? Absolutely. There's sin is everywhere, all that kind of stuff. But you look at how the left has weaponized their ideology, and their entire political approach is that of demonization. You can see why our country's divided. And it's honestly, there probably is no group more at the heart of it than the Southern Poverty Law Center.
Yeah. I think just basic lived experience, most people would say in your neighborhoods and communities, you don't have a problem living with people who aren't like you.
Exactly. It's pure. It's my thing about we talked about this with Wilfred Riley a few weeks ago. I know nobody who listens to Nick Fuentes, right? Like, I don't know anybody who knows somebody who watches Nick Fuentes. And that's such a good example, because I think that the thing I'm going to be most looking forward to in this indictment is we're going to get, as this trial goes on, we're going to get a clearer and clearer view of how the left funds their activism and funds their outrage machine. And I think a piece of it, and again, this was some of the stuff we saw about Nick Fuentes, that a lot of his numbers are juiced from Chinese and Russia, and who knows, maybe even SPLC or groups like that. Their sort of funding mechanisms. It's the thing, I say this, I don't know if I've said this on the pod before, but as an organization and as someone who organizes rallies, and David knows this, we do this, like Mike, you too, like that tries to get people to show up for stuff. It's not easy. Mm-hmm. But when you see the left pull off one of their rallies and they do it in like a week's notice, like that's only through a massively funded network of activists and paid protesters. And I think we're going to see more and more. I saw one number that the SPLC is sitting on $820 million.
Good.
Right?
They've commoditized race.
Right.
Just like we've commoditized poverty. I was talking to several members this week, and we were talking about the success sequence. And, we were talking about with 75% of African-American kids have no fathers. Is teaching the success sequence where you're supposed to graduate high school, work a full-time job, get married before you have kids, is that offensive to a kid or a single mom, when they hear this message? And I said, no, it's not offensive. 71% of single moms want this message taught to their kids. So the question was, well, why would the left not want this taught? And I said, it's not because they don't believe it. It's because they've commoditized poverty, right? And so they live it out. All of them, especially the elites among them, they live out the 3 steps of the success sequence. Yeah. They just don't want it taught because it's bad for their business model, right? You have families that can take care of their own, then government doesn't grow. You have families that can't take care of their own, then family has to grow, and the left grows. Yep. Right? And they've done, the Southern Poverty Law Center has done the same thing with race. They manufacture race issues, and then they raise $100 and some million off of what? $200,000 investment. Right. That's amazing.
It's a great return. David, I got to drill in on that. That is like the quintessential, like sort of postmodern response to the success sequence. That, okay, the problem we face is not enough married moms and dads, but we can't tell kids that because it would be offensive. We can't teach kids the truth because it would be offensive to them. Like, this is, and I'll just say, I'm sure that was said to you by a Republican, right? Let alone somebody on the left. Now, again, I'm sure whoever that said that to you is going to end up voting yes on the bill, but that was a thought they had. And that is a question,
or it's at least a thought that they hear out there all the time and get confronted.
And like I've had people in the media bring that up to me about like, that because so many kids are raised in single parent homes, should we even be talking about this? Because it's gonna, we don't want to tell the kids. I would argue with 70% of, would you say 70% of African American kids being 75%, like. If that's the case, that makes this curriculum all the more important because they're not going to see it for themselves. They're not going to see the blessing and the benefit of having a married mom and dad at home and know like the goodness of and importance of responsibility. I mean, and again, frankly, if we're going to make the state purely a financial actor here, right? If we want to say the state is not a moral actor, it only operates in its financial interest, which we don't agree with. But if we were to do that, then the state has every interest to tell these kids to get married and have kids because those kids are far less likely to cost the state money in the future if they have a mom and dad at home. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And I think the other place I want to at least talk about the SPLC's use of the word hate, like they've cried wolf so many times that they almost devalue the concept of hate. And going back to the Charlottesville incident, that's kind of been pointed to as the right incident. And when we see actual violence, actual hate on display, then it almost doesn't matter. Like the concept of what is actually a hateful action has been completely taken out of dialogue in society.
Yeah. No, again, like you look at the left has dominated the news cycle with Charlottesville and January 6th, David's favorite holiday every year.
Come on.
Buffalo hat.
I knew it was coming.
But they've dominated the headlines with those two, which, you know, again, I think we're going to see more and more examples of left funding involved in all of these types of events. And what we just never talk about is the Summer of Love, where, again, cities like downtown Columbus and cities all across America were absolutely destroyed by the left. And the Chaz in Portland, the autonomous zone there, the chop zone, all of these things where, again, when Joe Biden won in 2020, there were not riots all across America. When it looks like Donald Trump might win, guess who's getting out the plywood and start covering up their windows? There's a very clear trend of which side of the political spectrum, and this to me is, again, my pushback on the both sides Christians. Like, yes, there are issues on the right. Yes, Republicans are not the answer to saving America. It's only Jesus. But the nature between the way the two ends of the political spectrum express themselves is so vastly different. You're doing a massive disservice to say it's equally sort of equal sin on both sides, right?
Yeah. Are we going to be able to stay on the hate map though, or are we going to lose our spot?
I mean, honestly,
you want to be our proxy on
listen,
that.
if these guys, I will say, I've got. It's hard to predict where this is going to go, right? I don't see this getting dismissed. I don't see this thing washing away.
I just feel like if you're not on the map, you're not doing it right.
Right? No. I hear that, but the only reason why I bring that up, Dave, is that like it's conceivable this wipes out the SPLC. Probably not likely. They've got so much money. When you have as much money as the SPLC, you know they can.
Well, and to your point, people likely agree with what they've done.
Right. Exactly.
So it's not going to hurt people who are giving to them.
But if these, I mean, the asset forfeiture that is talked about in here, and the more and more that comes out, if you start seeing indictments of individuals, you know, we could fall off the hate map. I wouldn't be upset about it, but you know, again, at the same time,
it's a badge of honor.
It
Can
is
we
a badge
buy
of honor
the website?
Exactly.
Just float them a little bit, like
we don't have the money to get on the SPLCs to pay their bills. That's yeah.
You never know. Well, this conversation really kind of took off on its own.
All right.
We're going to call this an episode for this week, a special just discussion on this really unique story. I don't know that there's anything that we've seen like this because of all the nuances and overlap and Venn diagram, whatever you want to call it. Just interesting story. And we wanted to talk about it, especially because we've seen the firsthand impacts of the SPLC's slander campaign.
Yeah, no, and this is, you know, from the moment that President Trump got in, and especially when he appointed Russ Vogt as the head of the Office of Management and Budget. You've seen a very concerted effort to stop the funding of the left, right? So things like USAID and those things went away. But especially in Washington circles, you would hear, hey, they're really looking at the funding mechanism of the left and the corruption in the left. And honestly, I'm really encouraged. Just the very nature that this is coming out, 16 months into his presidency and not 3 months into his presidency, shows this. And I think you can read the indictment and see that this was not some, politically driven case. This was genuine, Department of Justice investigation into wire fraud and defrauding donors and things like that. So, I'm hopeful that this is the beginning of really, again, breaking apart this leftist infrastructure that's corrupted so much of America. And the next thing we need to do is go after higher ed, but that's a whole other story. So,
maybe we'll save that for next week's podcast.
Exactly, right.
Well, thanks so much for tuning in for the conversation this week, everybody. We'll be back again with you next week for another episode of The Narrative. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of The Narrative, presented by CCV and produced by Wessler Media. If you found today's episode insightful, leave us a review or rating and subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts. We're your hosts, Mike Andrews, Aaron Bear, and David Mahan, and we'll see you next time on The Narrative.
If you've got something to say, we want to help you say it. I'm Vince Tornero. Since 2018, Wessler Media has helped churches, organizations, and events amplify their message through podcast, video, and social media. We also happen to produce The Narrative too. Let's talk. WesslerMedia.com, WESSLER Media.com.
My name is Lauren Metters, and I'm the Business Development Manager for the Christian Business Partnership. I want to invite you to imagine something with me for just a moment. Imagine if every Christian business owner in Ohio tossed a single rock in the same pond. One person tossing one rock makes a ripple in the pond, but thousands hitting the water at the same moment can make a big wave, big enough to change the entire structure of that pond. This is what happens when we join forces. Suddenly, we aren't just protecting Christian values in the marketplace. We're shaping the future of our communities, our economy, and the next generation. When Christian business owners stand together, we create real impact. That is why the Christian Business Partnership exists. Our members gain access to affordable group rate health insurance, discounted workers' comp, and other programs that protect your bottom line, all while amplifying your voice at the State House and standing strong for pro-family and pro-business legislation. Join our community where hundreds of Christian employers grow stronger together every year. Visit cbpohio.org today and become part of the movement.